A single, savage slap in the hollowed halls of the courthouse set off a chain reaction that would forever change the fabric of Charleston's justice system. When Officer Travis Boone, a third-generation cop with a long legacy of unchecked arrogance, struck Judge Eleanor Price, a dignified, silver-haired woman known for her unwavering resolve and decades of fighting racial prejudice, he believed he was merely asserting his authority in the way he always had. Instead, that brutal moment ignited a deep-seated reckoning in a city long divided by racism and inequality. In a courtroom adorned with graceful neoclassical columns and lined with cool marble, every eye fixed on the shocking scene as Boone's hand collided with Eleanor's cheek, sending ripples of disbelief through the gathered crowd. It was a moment that exposed not only Boone's cruelty, but also the systemic disdain that had long undercut justice for people of color. Judge Eleanor Price, once a passionate defense attorney who had fought tooth and nail for clients marginalized by poverty and race, now sat at the highest bench as the city's first black woman judge. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed every slight, even the barely perceptible microaggressions that seeped into the corridors of power. Having weathered decades of subtle insults and overt hostility, Eleanor carried the weight of her community's suffering in every measured breath. The courthouse, with its cobblestone floors and timeless architecture, bore witness to centuries of both progress and the bitter sting of racial injustice. Today, however, its ancient walls would tremble under the force of Eleanor's emerging fury and determination. Officer Boone, with his smug expression and self-assured swagger, had long hidden behind a veneer of entitlement. His reputation was a tapestry of complaints, harassment, excessive force, misconduct, swept away time and again by powerful allies. That morning, as he barked orders at a nervous teenager accused of vandalism and dismissed the judge's presence as an afterthought, his arrogance reached its zenith. But when his hand struck Judge Eleanor Price, the balance of power shifted in an instant. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence as Eleanor slowly turned her gaze upon Boone. Her voice calm, yet laced with a steely resolve that resonated with every soul present. "Did you just lay your hand on me in this sacred place?" she asked, her tone both gentle and thunderous, cutting through Boone's feeble attempt at denial. In that fraught moment, racial tensions and decades of systemic cruelty converged into a powerful display of defiance. Boone's face flushed with a mixture of shock and fear, a stark contrast to the cool, measured wrath in Eleanor's eyes. It was not simply a clash of individuals, but a symbolic confrontation between an oppressive, outdated order and the new era of accountability that Eleanor embodied. As murmurs of disbelief and sympathy rippled among the audience, many of whom had lived long enough to see injustice become a way of life, Eleanor's quiet determination promised a vengeance that was not born of personal spite, but of a collective yearning for justice. The day had come for a reckoning that would leave the entire courtroom and the city forever transformed, as the scales of power began to tip in favor of truth, dignity, and unyielding retribution. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom as the red recording lights blinked steadily in the high arched ceiling, silently documenting every moment. Sergeant Travis Boone's eyes darted nervously toward those blinking lights, and in that instant, his anger melted into a deep, unsettling fear. Judge Judith Hawkins, whose resolute gaze had already shaken the room earlier, raised her hand slowly and firmly, cutting him off mid-rant. "You have spent 20 years hiding behind excuses and letting your misconduct vanish into thin air," she said in a measured tone that echoed against the marble walls. "Today, your actions in front of these witnesses, recorded for all to see, will no longer be brushed aside." Her words, crisp and unwavering, sent a ripple of shock through everyone present. Standing tall in the historic courtroom, Judge Hawkins moved away from the bench with a deliberate grace, each step resonating like a countdown to justice. She announced, with the authority granted by South Carolina law, that Sergeant Boone was now under formal judicial investigation for his assault on a public official. The air turned electric as her declaration filled every corner of the room, and even the soft murmurs from the gallery could not drown out the weight of her verdict. Boone's face, once flushed with smug defiance, fell into a mask of stunned disbelief as he realized that his long-practiced abuse of power was finally catching up with him. Without missing a beat, Judge Hawkins addressed the entire courtroom, her voice soft yet imbued with a steely determination. "This is not merely a matter of courtroom decorum. It is about upholding the law and protecting the dignity of every citizen. If the law fails to protect those who are meant to enforce it fairly, then we are no longer living in a true democracy." Her words, spoken in a plain, conversational tone that resonated deeply with the many seasoned souls present, painted a stark picture of justice demanded and justice delivered. As Officer Mills escorted a trembling Boone to holding room B without the use of cuffs but with unmistakable firmness, Boone tried to muster a weak plea, his voice cracking as he claimed that he had risked his life on the city's mean streets and that his actions were merely a mistake born of tension. But Judge Hawkins was unyielding. "Your career was shattered the moment your hand struck my face," she said calmly, her words laced with both sorrow and righteous indignation. "You have long mistaken power for protection and fear for respect, and now you must answer for it." The atmosphere was charged with a palpable mix of vindication and sorrow as the courtroom doors closed behind Boone, his final words echoing in the charged silence. "You think you've won, don't you?" In response, Judge Hawkins leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper yet clear enough for all to hear. "I think for once, the wrong person is paying the price." Outside the courtroom, whispers spread like wildfire. This was not just an incident of misconduct. It was a reckoning, a historic moment where the scales of justice tilted, promising retribution for decades of injustice and a future where accountability finally prevailed. Judge Victoria Reynolds narrowed her eyes and said, "Then we better start now," as her trusted bailiff Carter nodded slowly while turning to leave. Yet when he reached for the door handle, she whispered quietly, "They think this was about a slap, but they don't realize we just opened the door we've been pounding on for years." The door closed behind him, leaving the room charged with an electric sense of impending change. 30 minutes later, 2 internal affairs agents arrived. One was Agent Rosaline Keene, a no-nonsense black woman renowned for cleaning up corruption, and the other was Agent Felix Reyes, a younger Latino man whose sharp eyes and tone left no room for doubt. Judge Reynolds had met Keene before and knew she never tolerated the convenient dismissals that allowed officers like Travis Boone to keep a spotless record despite a history of brutality. Keene flipped open a thick file labeled Boone, Travesty, admitting, "We have been watching him for a while. His record is just clean enough to avoid action. Too many convenient gaps, too many cases closed without follow-up." Reynolds muttered that convenient should be a felony in itself. Reyes leaned forward and explained that the courtroom surveillance, fully backed up on their servers with both audio and video evidence, confirmed every detail: Boone's strike, his subsequent statements, and the judge's resolute response. He added, "We have noted everyone present. The chain of accountability is about to be tested." With a voice quiet yet laced with steel, Judge Reynolds replied, "I want more than accountability. I want the foundation cracked wide open." Keene asked, "Judge, how far are you willing to go with this?" Without hesitation, Reynolds answered, "All the way." Reyes then pulled out a thumb drive and inserted it into his tablet to show her an internal report from 2019, a brutal civilian complaint detailing how Boone had beaten a 17-year-old boy during an arrest, doctored the body cam footage, and allowed the original video to vanish without trace. The report, dismissed quietly due to lack of evidence, now revealed Detective M. Whitaker's name, Boone's former training officer, retired yet leaving behind an entrenched system of cover-ups that extended even to prosecutors. ADA Carson E. Ramsey's name appeared repeatedly. She was the prosecutor who had sat in Reynolds' courtroom too many times, always striking suspicious deals with law enforcement and even offering Boone an all-too-comforting pat on the back after dubious testimonies. Reynolds leaned back in her chair, heart pounding as she realized this was not merely about a violent cop, but about a rotten system built on racism and corruption. "I want a list of every case Boone touched, every complaint buried, and every prosecutor who helped erase the truth," she declared, her voice firm enough for all to hear. Carter, the ever-loyal bailiff, exhaled slowly, comparing the scandal to a rotting orchard rather than just one bad apple. Just then, her office phone rang, and Chief Nolan's cautious, familiar voice warned that by dragging in names of commanders and past leadership, she risked tearing the department apart. With unwavering resolve, Judge Reynolds responded, "I am not here to clean quietly. I am here to reveal the truth. If silence is complicity, then I will be the one to break it." As the courthouse remained shrouded in eerie pre-dawn quiet, and every internal file and voice recording laid bare a network of systemic injustice, Judge Reynolds knew that come sunrise, she would demand a public hearing with the press present, so that every American would witness the dismantling of a corrupt system and the birth of true accountability. Judge Mariah Thompson said clearly, "I refuse to let this go quietly," her voice steady and resolute as she looked at Agent Keene, who nodded slowly in approval. "I am not here to walk on the fence. I want..." By 9 o'clock in the morning, the courthouse had turned into a pressure cooker of whispered conversations and tense glances. Judge Thompson, flanked by her loyal bailiff Carter and internal affairs agent Rosaline Keene, strode into the main courtroom without her robe. Today she was not presiding, she was fighting. The moment she stepped in, murmurs subsided into an expectant hush. At the far end, Assistant District Attorney Carson Ramsey stood beside a representative from the State Ethics Board, a young white man in a tailored gray suit whose name tag read Elliot Parrish. His expression was cold and calculating, his tight smile belying the harsh truth he was about to enforce. "Judge Thompson, we have received your request for a public hearing regarding your recusal," Parrish said formally. "I am here to make it part of the public record." Thompson replied firmly, "I have reviewed the arguments filed by the DA's office, claiming I am emotionally compromised by the incident with Officer Boone. I am not compromised. I refuse to let this case be quietly deluded." Locking eyes with a young black reporter in the front row, she declared, "I request that the Boone case be elevated to special review status and that an independent federal monitor be assigned to investigate every case involving Officer Boone and his cohorts." A murmur of shock swept the room. Thompson handed a file to Agent Keene, who placed it on the table for all to see. Inside were 3 complaints, 5 sealed memos, 2 missing body cam logs, and a transcript from a 2018 juvenile trial, all bearing Ramsey's signature. "You declined to prosecute Boone in 5 separate cases, despite documented excessive force and contradictory testimonies," she accused. Ramsey's face drained of color as Keene slid over a second document, revealing a wire transfer of $15,000 from an entity tied to the Charleston Police Benevolent Fund. Money rerouted to build a legal shield for Boone. "If public funds are being funneled into legal defenses for corrupt officers, then it is a pattern we must expose," Thompson stated with quiet fury. Meanwhile, in a cold holding cell, Sergeant Boone paced like a caged animal. His strong hands, once symbols of authority, now trembled with fear and regret. Suddenly, the cell door clicked open, and a man in a gray suit entered. His bald head and steely gaze sent chills down Boone's spine. "I represent interests deeply concerned with Judge Thompson's actions," the man said as he tossed a file onto Boone's bench. "You have been useful in the past, but now you are a liability." Boone's anger flared as he demanded, "What do you want me to do?" The man smiled slightly and replied, "Warn her, remind her who you are." Boone stared in disbelief at the file filled with personal details about Judge Thompson, realizing this was surveillance and leverage. Judge Thompson looked back at the courtroom, her heart heavy, yet her resolve unshaken. She knew every layer of corruption shielding officers like Boone was beginning to crumble, and she would not rest until the entire machine was dismantled for all to see. Judge Mariah Thompson knew that true power never came from a robe or a courtroom. It came from instilling fear in those who thought they were untouchable. As she absorbed the chilling words delivered to Sergeant Boone, words meant to remind him that he was no longer invincible, she felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. Boone's eyes had met the cold, calculating stare of a man who dared him to defy her, daring him with a promise of a lifeline that would spare him from federal prison in exchange for his silence. That promise came wrapped in the threat of eternal obscurity, a fate where he would rot, forgotten. The file he hesitated over was a symbol of everything he had built his career on, now a crumbling testament to a system that protected him while punishing the innocent. Across town, Judge Thompson walked the echoing halls of the courthouse like a woman heading straight into a brewing storm. Her tailored stormcoat draped over her shoulders and her heels clicking authoritatively, she sensed that the press was gathering, some nodding in quiet solidarity, others whispering behind raised cell phones. In her private chambers, her trusted bailiff Carter waited with news that was both personal and professional. "You didn't answer my text," he chided gently, adding that she had 6 voicemails waiting. 3 from the mayor's office, 2 from the ethics board, and 1 from your sister. When she heard that her own sister had called, mentioning that she'd seen Judge Thompson on the news and even joked that she looked taller, a half-smile briefly softened her determined gaze, but no amount of familial warmth could lift the heavy burden she carried. As she sat behind her desk scanning the latest file from keen updates on Ada Ramsey, which also hinted at a suspicious private contract, her phone buzzed with an unknown message. The message read, "That very night, Sergeant Boone was abruptly relocated. No official release, no paperwork, just smuggled through the back corridors of the precinct like a traitor in enemy territory. He was handed a burner phone, an unregistered vehicle, and given a name that would haunt him. Judge Mariah Thompson." The mysterious man who had delivered that message reappeared briefly, leaning into the car window and whispering a single chilling warning. "Clean, subtle. You don't touch her. You don't even see her. You just make her feel it." Boone started the engine, muttering bitterly that he had spent his entire life making people feel things, but now, as he disappeared into the Charleston night, his voice trembled with uncertainty. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight struggled to warm the cold facade of the federal building in downtown Charleston, Judge Thompson received a package with no return address. Inside lay a photograph of her nephew, taken just 2 days ago as he biked home from school. On the back, scribbled in jagged block letters, was the message, "Stay in your lane." Standing still for a long, heavy moment, she knew that whoever had sent the message was trying to remind her that power, especially the power wielded by racist enforcers like Travis Boone, thrived on fear. Without delay, she picked up the phone and commanded, "Get me the U.S. Marshal's office." She was done playing by outdated rules. Today, she would rewrite them. Sitting across from 3 U.S. Marshals and 2 Department of Justice officials in a stark, fortress-like meeting room, Judge Thompson slid the photograph across the table. "My nephew," she said calmly, her voice resonating with both sorrow and iron resolve. "This was sent to me this morning as a threat from someone acting in Boone's interest. Boone doesn't send messages like this unless he's been given the green light." A tall, gray-haired marshal named Mercer studied the photo without a trace of emotion. "What exactly are you asking for, Judge?" they pressed. "I want full protection for my family," Thompson declared. "I want Travis Boone placed under federal custody by the end of today, and I demand an emergency judicial order freezing every case tied to his testimony for an independent review." DOJ Representative Francis Kwan raised an eyebrow at the boldness of her request, remarking that it would shake Charleston's courts for months. Thompson met her gaze unflinchingly, signaling that this was just the beginning of a reckoning. Back outside, Agent Keene reported that their investigation had traced Boone's burner phone to a shell company in Atlanta, one tied to a lobbying firm involved in the mayor's re-election campaign. "The rot goes far beyond the courts," Thompson murmured, her voice dropping to a determined whisper as she recalled previous corruption probes and the mysterious disappearance of a local journalist, Julia Spence. "Find me everything Spence was working on, every source, every file. If she was pulling a thread, we're going to rip it out of the wall." With that, Judge Thompson stepped out into the courthouse halls once more, not just as a judge, but as a force of retribution, a storm determined to dismantle a corrupt machine and restore justice to a city long held hostage by fear and discrimination. Judge Evelyn Parker sat at her desk in her modest yet dignified chambers, staring at the files that now lay before her like a roadmap of corruption. Every document, every case, every name painted a grim picture of a system long rotten from the inside, a system that had let racial prejudice and unchecked authority flourish. Internal Affairs, federal investigators, and an external judicial review board had formed a joint task force to uncover the truth. And though Sergeant Travis Boone still clammed up, everyone knew he would eventually have to talk. The files detailed patterns of abuse, a map of injustice that showed how Boone, once untouchable, was now merely one piece in a far larger, decaying machine. As the sun began to dip below the city's edge, casting a warm golden glow on the steps of the courthouse, Evelyn walked to the window. Outside, a sea of people had gathered. Reporters, protesters, and survivors united by shared pain and a demand for accountability. Some held signs with Boone's name, others clutched faded photographs of loved ones whose pleas for justice had been ignored for too long. Her loyal bailiff, Carter, came to stand beside her. Softly he murmured, "You did it." Evelyn shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the crowd, and replied, "No, Carter, I just turned on the light." It was a light that would now expose every dark corner of a corrupt institution. Inside her chambers, a press conference was scheduled for 10 a.m., yet the courthouse steps were already packed by 9:30. Local reporters, national correspondents, legal observers, and citizens with placards proclaiming "Justice for all" or "Justice for none" filled every available space. Today, Evelyn would not be sitting behind a bench in her robe. She was going to stand among the people as a fighter, as a citizen determined to dismantle a legacy of abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. According to Agent Keene, Boone had been moved to a secure facility, and he was already talking, naming names. 12 individuals in all were implicated, 7 police officers, 2 ADA prosecutors, 1 retired captain, 1 city council member, and 1 shock that made Evelyn's heart sink. A name she never imagined would be tarnished by such treachery. Judge Benjamin Halcroft, her mentor from law school, who had once called her the future of Charleston law, now appeared on that damning list. His signature was on several questionable case dismissals that had conveniently allowed Boone's misconduct to go unpunished. Evelyn's hands balled into fists as she murmured, "No, Ben?" The betrayal cut deep, for she had learned from him the importance of integrity in a system that now thrived on silence and complicity. "This goes deeper than crooked cops," she declared, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and fierce determination. "This is institutional, judicial, political, and generational." Agent Keene nodded gravely, reminding her that this was a network of corruption that had survived by feeding off silence. But silence, she vowed, would no longer be tolerated. "We make noise," she whispered, "and we start now." With the cameras flashing and the crowd growing restless, Evelyn stepped up to the podium outside her chambers. Dressed not in her customary robe but in a sharp-fitted blazer over a deep charcoal blouse, she looked every bit the formidable woman she was. She addressed the gathering with a measured calm that belied the storm raging within. "I became a judge because I believed in the promise of justice," she began, her eyes sweeping over the expectant faces before her. "But promises mean nothing if they are not kept. Today I stand not just as a member of the court, but as a witness to what has been broken and to what must be rebuilt." She then held up a folder containing the names of those who had colluded over the past decade to shield their own misdeeds. "I have submitted this list to federal investigators," she announced, her tone resolute and unyielding. "We are not here because of one man's slap. We are here because that slap revealed a system built on fear, silence, and betrayal." The crowd erupted in scattered applause, a ripple of hope mixed with anger. Yet even as she declared these truths, Evelyn's phone buzzed. A chilling voicemail from a blocked number played. A smooth, precise message from none other than Judge Halcroft. His voice, as refined as ever, warned her to reconsider her crusade. "Before you commit to the destruction of everything we have built, understand that some structures survive because they must. If you take us all down, you will lose everything." The threat hung in the air like a dark omen. Carter later confirmed that a black SUV had been seen leaving the courthouse loading dock, a silent sign that the enemy was mobilizing. But Evelyn Parker was not one to back down. At midnight, the first smear article appeared online. Vague accusations, manufactured outrage, and digital poison launched against her name and her bloodline. Her nephew's school even received a call questioning whether he was being indoctrinated. Undeterred, she produced a small black binder, a nuclear weapon of documentation that contained every whispered secret, every note of betrayal, every case that had been quietly dismissed. "I'm going to make sure they can never hide again," she vowed in a low, determined tone, as she copied files and contacted trusted allies. 3 weeks later, the federal courthouse was packed to capacity. U.S. Marshals surrounded the building, and as Evelyn Parker, no longer just a judge but a crusader for truth, took the stand as a witness in the trial against Travis Boone and the corrupt machine behind him, she did so with quiet pride. The charges were staggering: assault of a federal judge, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to suppress evidence, and her testimony would be the spark that ignited a long-overdue reckoning in Charleston. Judge Regina Miles's steady voice rang out in the courtroom as the prosecutor asked, "What happened on the morning of April 11th?" Her tone was not loud but carried the weight of years of sacrifice. "I was struck in the face by a man who believed I didn't belong," she replied, her words measured and unyielding. That moment, she explained, shattered the very system she had served all her life. A system that had long valued law, respect, and truth only for those who fit a narrow, privileged mold. That slap, she continued, was not merely an act of violence but the final blow to a broken order that protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. Regina's gaze swept across the courtroom, not landing on Sergeant Boone, but on the faces of the jury and onlookers. That moment taught me that silence, which once shielded the corrupt, can no longer keep us down. If I do not stand up today, many more will remain silent tomorrow. The prosecutor nodded solemnly, and when Boone's attorney stumbled through his cross-examination, asking if she thought she was above the law, Regina's response was as calm as it was devastating. "I think I am as subject to the law as everyone else, but I bring only the truth." Her voice resonated with a raw honesty that cut through the dense atmosphere of prejudice and institutional decay. 2 days later, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. But Boone's fall was not an isolated event. It sparked a wave of accountability that quickly swept through the entire judicial and law enforcement apparatus. A statewide investigation was launched into judicial misconduct. Over 140 past convictions were re-examined, and a civil rights commission was set in motion to audit officer complaint procedures. The governor even called for a bipartisan reform task force, and the Charleston Police Department soon found itself under full federal oversight. That rainy Thursday, Regina returned to the very courtroom where the slap had reverberated like a death knell of injustice. As she stood alone before the bench, her reflection shimmered in the polished wood, a reminder of both her past authority and her newfound resolve. Later that day, her trusted bailiff Carter entered with damp coat and weary eyes. "They want to name the judicial conference room after you," he said softly. Regina raised an eyebrow and replied with a wry smile, "I haven't died yet." But beneath the light humor lay a heavy question. Would the reforms truly stick? "Some will, others will take time," Carter remarked, and Regina nodded. "That's what they never tell you about justice. It is not a single moment, but an erosion and a slow, deliberate rebuilding." In a final act of defiance, Regina stood before the State Judiciary Review Board that afternoon and announced her resignation. "I believe in the law, in its power to protect and to punish," she declared, her voice trembling with both heartbreak and fierce determination. "But institutions must be rebuilt by new hands. I lit a fire, and it is not for me to stand in its glow." Her words stirred gasps from the room, yet one board member rose and whispered that her actions had inspired a movement. Regina simply replied, "Change does not need a monument. It needs momentum." 2 months later, at her family's home in Mount Pleasant, the quiet was no longer menacing, but cleansing. Her nephew bounded up the steps, calling out, "Auntie Regina, I saw you on TV. You made them listen." Holding him tight, she whispered back, "I made them look. And now, we must continue to remind them that real justice echoes for generations."